Good, good. The primary is tomorrow, actually, the new primary. So
Going to be a busy day.
it wouldn't surprise me.
How's the sense on the ground right now?
Honestly, I'm not doing the politics of it. I'm just doing the lawyering of it, and so I think it's a bad situation, and it shouldn't have happened. We shouldn't be in this position, but you know, where we are.
Are you trying to stay pretty agnostic throughout the whole thing where you were so closely tied to it?
Well, I mean, I've been closely tied to it from the legal point of view. I do election cases really all over the state of Connecticut, and um, I don't really get involved in doing political advising for this type of situation. I've done it for a couple of other races, but this is. I don't think you can be a campaign advocate and be a lawyer at the same time.
Yeah, it would be a little challenging.
Well, people make decisions in campaigns for different reasons than lawyers make decisions relating to campaigns. So I try to keep them pretty separate.
You just mentioned that you've handled other cases. Anything like this? Anything to this extreme before?
Not to this extreme. No, I've handled. I actually got a new primary for a state representative candidate in Bridgeport a year ago, where there was evidence that voters' names had been forged on absentee ballot applications, that the voters actually didn't sign the applications. And so that was a very close race. We put on evidence that some of the signatures had been fake. They'd been signed by somebody else. And so a judge ordered a new primary in that situation. But I've been involved in quite a few election cases around the state through the years.
Do you think this one's just blown up so big because of the relation to 2020 and how it's kind of on everybody's brain, this idea of election fraud?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it, but I also think that the videos obviously made a huge difference. They made a huge difference both in terms of the evidence, and they made a huge difference in terms of the kind of the mood, the mood of the people in the city seeing with their own two eyes that this is what was happening. Now, I've been doing this a long time. I am not a naive person, and anybody who thinks that this was not happening before is being naive. Just this time it got caught. There was video, and the video, enough of the video came to light to make it clear that this ballot harvesting against Connecticut law was what was going on. So
That's what was surprising to me is I didn't realize this is an issue that has been plaguing Bridgeport for quite some time. I read a statement, I think it was from the office of the Secretary of the State, and she was pushing for people to go to the polling places, vote in person, and was citing, decades of fraud allegations, saying just go to the polls. Don't worry about vote by mail, go to the polls, cast your ballot.
yeah, no, Bridgeport has got a very long and checkered history when it comes to particularly absentee ballot issues. I could have I could have cited to the court in my post trial briefing. I could have cited only cases from Bridgeport in support of the relief. I think that apart from a case in 1982 involving really kind of an accidental absentee ballot misconduct, there has never been a successful absentee ballot challenge anywhere in Connecticut except for Bridgeport.
Wow, really? I don't know that that's
Yeah.
a record you want to have.
Well, it is part of the political culture in Bridgeport. It is something that uh, I talked with one of the state senators here, Maryland Moore, who's a very honest, very by the book, straight shooter. Uh, she has been quoted publicly saying that being in meetings where candidates said, "Look, there's no way you can get elected in Bridgeport without the absentee ballot harvesting operation," and the people that are in charge they don't seem to think that it's a reputation that is a bad one for them to have. It's been going on for years, and one of the kind of the main partisans in the case that I had involving the September primary 2 months earlier had a case that she had from 2019 referred to the chief prosecutor in the state of Connecticut for possible criminal violations. And then 2 months later, we're out seeing the same thing, or seeing the same alleged thing from 2019. And 2 months after the referral, it's sort of it's the Judge Clark called the conduct shocking, and that's what most people thought.
That's what really sparked my interest and kind of what was the catalyst for me reaching out to you to try to figure out what's going on is I read some quotes from him and looked into the case, and it seemed like the evidence was just shocking. It was pretty damning and alarming in a lot of ways. You called this an operation. Is that what you believe it is? It's not just people trying to get their candidate in, it's more formulaic?
Oh, I don't think that it's just people acting completely unilaterally and coincidentally. Lawyers, as a species, don't tend to believe in coincidences. Things happen for a reason, by and large. And this, you've got one partisan making 10 drops in drop boxes on separate occasions. You got another one making 5. You got some other ones, and those are the ones we identified. We couldn't find if anybody had put their harvested ballots in the U.S. mail. We'd never know it. We could never find that because there's no cameras on mailboxes. So no, this is this. At least according to reputation and the information that we have from people like Senator Moore, this is just part of the electoral process here.
And people have constituents just accepted that, or are they not as aware as the people who are running and playing the game?
Well, that's a hard question to answer because I don't know exactly what constituents are being told. The state actually just last week ordered a subpoena to the state of Connecticut Office of Policy and Management to get records of a rental rebate program from Bridgeport. There's been chatter here that people were promised a break on their rent if they were in housing authority property or on any kind of property really where this rental rebate program could apply. Now we couldn't get into that in my case. It was a very expedited process, and once we had the videos, frankly, that kind of focused my attention on the ballot harvesting issue. But we don't really know what voters are being told. I'm confident that 90% of the voters that pass their ballot over to one of these partisans, they don't they don't they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They're not trying to break the law, and for them it's not a crime. It's misconduct, and it leads to their ballot not being counted. But it's a crime for the person who takes somebody else's ballot.
And if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, all you have to do is vote for this candidate and your rent's going to be decreased, that's a pretty hard deal to pass up.
Well, we'll find out if that happened. I subpoenaed those rental rebate records in my case in October, but again, just ran out of time. The election was 6 weeks after the primary. We had to get a decision on whether a new primary was going to be ordered before the election. I am hopeful that some entity with greater investigative power than me, somebody who has either a grand jury or has search warrant capacity or has law enforcement capacity, is going to look into that. I think it's definitely an important question to look into.
So take me back to the beginning for people that aren't aware of this mayor race in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It's between John Gomes and the incumbent, who is currently the mayor. How did this come to your attention? How did Gomes get on your radar?
Well, I am kind of known in Connecticut for doing election cases, so fairly often, if somebody's got an election-related problem, I'm going to be on their short list. But the way it came out publicly was there was a courageous whistleblower, frankly, somebody who there were 4 drop boxes in Bridgeport where completed absentee ballots could be voted. And there are video cameras on each of the 4 drop boxes, which is good. The problem is nobody looks at the feed and nobody looks at the recording. And they're not monitored. There's 3,000 cameras in the city of Bridgeport that are all controlled by the police department. They'll go to them if there's like an accident under some intersection. They'll go to the camera. If there's a shooting on some street, they'll go to the camera. But they don't go. They don't monitor these cameras 24/7. So what happened is that there was a complaint by somebody, just a passerby, saying that there was odd activity happening at one of the drop boxes early in the morning on one day, a couple of weeks before the primary. And apparently, somebody looked at the video, thought that there was something unusual about it. They reported it, and the police did a brief investigation, but didn't uncover the absentee ballot issue. They were just looking to see if somebody was tampering with the ballot box, maybe. And then what happened, though, is the primary took place in September, and then a couple of days later, somebody from inside the city government leaked about a 2-minute section of one of the drops publicly, and it appeared to show what ultimately it did show, which was somebody with a ballot harvesting dropping a bunch of absentee ballots in that didn't belong to them. So John Gomes, who I didn't know, I'd never met him before, called me and said, would I be interested in getting involved? And I said, well, let me take a look at it. I sent a letter to the police department directing them to preserve all of the video on all 4 of the drop boxes. We got more of the video, found that there were multiple occasions where people had done this. So I agreed to help them out and filed an expedited challenge to the primary, and then Judge Clark on November 1st agreed with.
How many hours of footage did you guys comb through?
Well, they've been recording for 30 days before the primary, or that's when the ballots could, or 3 weeks actually before the primary. So there's 21 days, 24 hours a day, 4 drop boxes. So I think that it was 2,100 hours of video, which I watched. I will confess, I watched at 16 times speed because that's the only way you could possibly get through that. So it was tedious. It took a long time, but it was ultimately, it was super important to the result because we identified about 430 people approached the drop boxes, no more than that. There's a couple where it's a little ambiguous, but no more than 430. And we also proved that about 1,250 ballots came in through the drop boxes. So, it's possible that, say, a husband and a wife, somebody drops in 2, or somebody drops in 2 for them and their 18-year-old kid. That's possible. But 800 or 900 between the number of approaches and the number of absentee ballots that came in through the drop boxes seemed pretty unlikely to us, particularly given the rest of the video evidence.
Yeah, that's a pretty substantial difference.
Well, and one of the other things that was really important, and really, and I think proved what the kind of the depths of the ballot harvesting operation was. There are some districts where Mayor Ganem's vote total was almost 70% by absentee ballots. Think about that. 7 out of 10 people in some districts voted by absentee ballot. In other districts, it was as low as 5%. So unless there is Connecticut does not have excuse-free absentee balloting. You have to either be out of the town or sick or physically disabled, a couple of other reasons. Unless you believe that people in one district are, what is that, 15 times more likely to be sick or out of the town or physically disabled, that's just powerful evidence of an intentional harvesting operation, because the numbers just make no sense without that explanation.
Harvesting operations. So are we talking about individuals who legally voted for a candidate and then an individual went and picked up those votes, or were these ballots not correctly filled out by the individual who they were supposed to go to?
Well, what we proved is that they were ballots that at a minimum were not returned by the voter in the way that the voter is under state law supposed to return them. Connecticut has a pretty long and not on the scale of Bridgeport, but does have a kind of a history with absentee ballots, and there is some suspicion here. And so the law says that in order for an absentee ballot to be lawfully counted, it has to be returned by the voter by mail, returned by the voter to a drop box, returned by a designee of the voter who's and if they are disabled or sick, or an immediate family member or a parent of a voter in school. That's it. And our statute is very clear that under no circumstances should a partisan affiliated with a campaign ever touch a ballot. In fact, the mayor said, we direct our people not to touch the ballot. Now, that obviously the actions spoke louder than words, but the voter is expected to never give up custody of the ballot except for those very, very narrow circumstances. And that is just plainly not what happened here. Now, is it possible that some of those absentee ballots that were completed were actually intercepted by somebody from a mailbox and taken and filled out and had a name forged, signature forged, and then submitted not by the voter but by somebody else? You bet. That's absolutely possible. Again, I am confident that is what law enforcement is going to be looking at, and the State Elections Enforcement Commission. I don't know what they're going to find, but at least anecdotally, that happens. That ballots don't get to where they're supposed to get to, and are voted by somebody other than the voter. I didn't try to prove that, and I didn't prove that in our hearing, but I have a significant suspicion that happens.
I was reading an article where one of the individuals implicated in the ballot harvesting was accusing another individual who I believe was on the city council of harvesting absentee ballots from a mailbox outside of a senior living facility. Have you read that?
I think I know what you're talking about. The claim was that another city council member went into an apartment and took a ballot that had been completed by the voter. The police just announced that they were not going to be filing any criminal charges with respect to that. I think that was just announced on Friday. But I think, and the Ganem campaign has kind of pointed the fingers and said, well, the Gomes campaign is doing this as well. First of all, they had the opportunity to try to prove that at the trial, and they didn't call any of the people who they accused in the paper of misconduct as witnesses. But second of all, even if 100% of what they say is true, it is dwarfed by what we see on the videotape. And they had the access to the same videotape that we had. And if they thought the videotape showed something nefarious, they had the chance to use it.
Yeah, that was another interesting aspect, was that the Ganem campaign was pointing at Gomes and saying, you guys are being hypocrites. You're involved in the same thing. But then why not bring that up in court? Why not point to the video that you're citing after the fact?
Well, and I can't answer why another lawyer doesn't or does do something. All I know is that they had two witnesses under subpoena for the trial. And then I was told by the witnesses that they were interviewed by the defense attorneys, and after that, the subpoenas were withdrawn and they were not put on as witnesses. So, you don't need to be a lawyer to come to a conclusion on that, but that's my understanding of what happened.
Yeah, if you're not using your two witnesses, it's probably not a far stretch to say that their case wasn't that great.
Well, you only are going to put on evidence that you think is going to help, and if they went on the stand and said, yeah, look, I had 6 ballots and they were all people in my family and I had their permission, okay, you're not going to put that evidence on. And so I don't know exactly what they were going to say. I wasn't going to put them on. There was no need to. But the people I put on, 2 of them took the 5th. When I asked them, is that you in the video? Involved in dropping ballots that didn't belong to you. And I've been doing this for pretty close to 40 years. I've never had a witness actually in a trial assert the Fifth Amendment privilege to refuse to answer a question. And so that was a pretty jarring day, frankly. That was and one of them is a city council member here in Bridgeport, and the other one is the vice chair of the Democratic Town Committee. So it was jarring.
Yeah, it's alarming when you hear that these aren't just individuals out about in the community. These are people who are holding these positions where you would think there would be some modicum of respect for the process, I guess, or a greater understanding.
Oh, I don't think it's a question of a lack of understanding of the process at all. I think it's a lack of respect for the process and a lack of respect for the rules. And and this is one of the things that is true for some people involved in politics. And what's more important? Is it more important to win, or is it more important to play by the rules or follow the rules? If not play, but just follow the rules as part of an election. I am sure that there are, if you walked into a convention with 100 people running for office, you could get different answers to that question, right? Um, I think the problem is that when people don't play by the rules, it just creates cynicism, breeds distrust. This case. I mean, I'm glad that it came out. I'm hoping that there's going to be some reform. But what did it do to increase people's confidence in the political system, in the electoral system? Not only in Bridgeport, but I mean all over the United States. It was again. I'm glad at one level that it happened, and that we were able to uncover it. But on the other hand, I think it's just profoundly sad that it did happen, and that we had to uncover it. I wish that I had never met John Gomes, because the rules were followed and he didn't need a lawyer.
What were you thinking as you start combing through this video and you start recognizing these discrepancies?
Well, it didn't take very long once we started looking at the video and started doing the numbers on the vote totals from the various precincts, before it was pretty clear that there was a major problem. I was in election cases. This election, or this primary, actually, it was not the closest primary I've ever been involved in. It was 251 votes. And kind of where you always start with an election case is you go to the end. You look at the end first and say, well, how do I show that the result, could have been, probably would have been different, or could have been different? Or in Connecticut, the standard is whether the result is so uncertain that the judge cannot declare a winner. Well, the easy way to do that is like the case I had last year. There was a 2-vote difference between the winner and the loser, and I had 4 absentee ballot applications that I could prove were forged. Okay, well, 4 is greater than 2, so that's the judge ordered a new primary. Well, in this case, I look at a 251 vote total, and and that's not a minimal difference in a municipal race of this size. It's that's the first place you start is how is a judge going to look at a 251 vote total and say there was misconduct on such a broad scale that it calls the result into doubt? Well, ultimately, it wound up becoming, I think, to me, it wound up becoming not a close call because of the scope of the misconduct on the video, and the assertion of the Fifth Amendment privilege, and the vote totals in the different precincts. It was, I just keep coming back to his word, his language is shocking, and it was shocking, and I agree with him. I mean, it was. Uh, and absent the video, I don't think we are able to prevail, because there would be no way to show that there was that kind of level of misconduct.
Yeah, and absent that individual saying, "Hey, I think something's going on with these ballot boxes," and the recording, I mean, who knows if this would have ever been brought to anyone's attention?
Well, I know it wouldn't have been. It would have. Then the tapes erased. The video erases after 30 days. So if that had not come out within the 14 days that we could file an election challenge, then the whole thing goes away, and it never happens. So and that's kind of both sides that have looked at this case, both the Democrats and the Republicans that have looked at this case, they're both kind of drawing the wrong conclusion. Frankly, the Democrats are taking the position that, well, this shows how the system works. I say, yeah, kind of. It works if there's a whistleblower who leaks the 2 minutes of video that gets the ball rolling. But that doesn't. That didn't happen in 2022 here. It didn't happen in 2021. It didn't happen in 2020. So yeah, it worked. A judge heard the evidence. The judge made a decision based on the evidence that he had, but it was not guarantee that that was going to happen, and it wouldn't have happened but for the whistleblower. And and on the other side, the Republicans, I think, are drawing a little more uh, from the experience of Bridgeport than really the evidence warrants, because if the argument is that Bridgeport has been engaged in absentee ballot fraud for a long time, I'm 100% on board. It is clear that that's the circumstance. But again, I do these cases in all over the state of Connecticut, and there is nowhere else where there is even anecdotal evidence of misconduct on anything close to this scale. There have been some kind of sloppy town clerk practices, sloppy registrar practices, but in terms of just people out and out willfully ballot harvesting, the numbers don't add up. Don't indicate that this is a problem anywhere except Bridgeport. For example, we had something over, I think it was 15% or 20%, I think, in the last general election of the ballots cast were by absentee. And in New Haven, another comparably sized city, it's 5%. So the rate of absentee ballot use in Bridgeport is not accidental. It is part of this ballot harvesting process, culture, if you will. But my town, there's a couple of hundred people vote absentee ballot. Nobody's ballot harvesting. It wouldn't be tolerated, but it's tolerated here. It's tolerated both by the local municipality. The culture, I guess, is the way I would put it, and frankly, state leaders in Connecticut have not done enough to call it out, I can't explain at all. But it's been kind of an open secret for years, and it is still going on.
Do you think that if the absentee ballot rates were higher throughout the state of Connecticut, you would see more of this? Or there's just something intrinsically tied to Bridgeport that breeds this
No, I
culture?
don't. I think it's something intrinsically tied to Bridgeport. There is just about every race recently. I'll talk about Mayor Ganem's last two races. He lost, well, counting the primary, he lost his last three races on the machines, on the in-person voting. He then turned his numbers around overnight when the absentee ballots were counted. Well, that's and the numbers of people that vote absentee ballot in Bridgeport just dwarf the number of people anywhere else. It really takes a kind of a deliberate process to do ballot harvesting on a scale that would make a difference in an election. When you think about it, to get hundreds of absentee ballots that belong to somebody else and cast them, or even get the people to vote by absentee ballot who may not be qualified to vote absentee ballot. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of time. Uh, if somebody knocked on a door in my town, I live in a smaller town. If somebody knocked on a door in my town and said, "Well, I'd like you to fill out this form, you'll get an absentee ballot," no, they're going to say no. They're going to say, it's not the pandemic anymore. A lot of people did vote absentee during the pandemic, but they're going to say no. And whether it's cajoling, or whether it's persuading, or whether the rental rebate program is involved, or whether it's just kind of habit, I don't know. But I know that the evidence is that it is a significant problem.
Well, and tying back into Joe Ganem, his 2019 election was also plagued by allegations of fraud, was it not? I believe it's still under investigation. That one's drawn out a little while.
Well, that's the one that, that is the one that the State Elections Enforcement Commission just referred three people, well, in July, referred three people to the Chief State's Attorney's Office for possible criminal violations. So that one's still under investigation. And that case did not have video. That was a case where actually Marilyn Moore, the state senator, was running for mayor. She lost the primary, and no video came to light showing the ballot harvesting. But is it likely that there was ballot harvesting in that as well? Well, just based on the numbers, based on the way the results turned around overnight, I'd say there's a decent chance of that. But Without the kind of evidence we had, it's very, very hard to prove.
Do you anticipate that now that you do have this evidence and it's concrete that something will be done to mitigate these issues in the future?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer because I would like to think so, but I am suspicious whether there is going to be a way to legislate our way out of this problem. I think there are some things that a smart legislature could do. For example, I mean, they're all. I'm hearing from people, well, we're going to mandate that cameras are put on drop boxes. Well, okay, fine. I mean, it's not going to hurt. But what does that do? There are two problems with that. One is who's going to look at the video? And is somebody really going to look at 2,100 hours of video within a couple of days after an election to see if there was ballot harvesting? But I mean, more fundamentally, think about it. If a voter is allowed to return a ballot directly to the town clerk through a Dropbox or by the U.S. mail, if there is ballot harvesting going on, what are you going to do? You're not going to use the Dropbox because you know there's a camera. You're not going to bring it to the town clerk because they know it's not you. So no, you just put a stamp on it. So I am frankly a little bit afraid that what we have done in this case is just made a roadmap of how to get around some of the statutory requirements. But we're going to request the data from the primary when it takes place to see if the number of people using the drop boxes or the number of ballots that came in through a drop box is much smaller than it was compared to the U.S. mail uh, compared to the September primary. And if the numbers are flipped around, if now two-thirds came in through the drop box for the September primary, if two-thirds now come in through the U.S. mail and only a third through the drop box, I mean, draw your own conclusions. That means that somebody has found a way around it. Uh, I think that really the only realistic way out of this is both a culture change, just an acceptance of responsibility by the parties that this is not the way to win elections in Bridgeport, and also law enforcement. I think I think there is probably a limit to what people will do to cheat in an election if they know that they're going to prison for a couple of years. I just I people will do crazy things, but if there's a consequence of incarceration, that seems that would at least, I think, temper some of the enthusiasm and some of the we're going to get away with it approach that has been kind of a culture here for way too long.
Yeah, if you believe that you can cheat and win and your odds of getting caught are only 10%, how many people are going to take that deal?
Well, and there's no consequences if you get caught so far, right? I mean, we're still talking about what happened in 2019, and there haven't been any individual consequences to any of those people that were referred. Now, maybe there aren't going to be charges. Maybe there are going to be a bunch of criminal charges for my case. It wouldn't shock me, but it's going to come too late for the election. It's not going to be. It's not going to be decided in a time when voters would be able to use that data and use that information and make a decision. I would hope that the authorities would move faster than 4 years, which is how long they took with the last one. Now, and listen, I recognize that there was a pandemic and that really shut down a lot of investigations for a period of time. And I also say that the state of Connecticut has not funded the Elections Enforcement Commission very well. They have not. They have cut its staff significantly. They imposed for new cases. They've imposed a 1 year deadline where they have to either bring the case to close or dismiss it. But they don't have enough staff. They have nowhere near enough staff to do an investigation of what's happening in Bridgeport. It's impossible. If they had help from law enforcement, maybe, and I don't know whether they do or not, but it's certainly on their own. The civil side of it, the election enforcement is they just don't have the capacity to do this. And I think people know that. People are aware that it just falls into a drawer, and maybe I hear in a year, maybe I don't. But so far, for despite everything that's happened in Bridgeport through the years, there have been essentially no consequences.
That's alarming.
Oh, it's sad. There was an article actually in Sunday's New York Times of kind of the history of well, and part of the history of the misconduct in Bridgeport, and the writer kind of drew the same conclusion. Or quoted people drawing the same conclusion, that it's just dug in. It is part of the fabric of the way elections run in Bridgeport, and as you said, that if this is going to help win, and there aren't very many consequences, and there's not a good chance of getting caught, and there's no consequences if you do, then go ahead. I think, honestly, I would love to say that there's a legislative fix to this, and there may be some things that can be done to nibble around the edges. But when push comes to shove, if people, if there's going to be absentee balloting, which I think most people agree is a good idea, whether it's a good idea for universal absentee balloting. Some people really love it. Some people think it's not so great. But if there's going to be absentee ballot voting, then there do need to be rules, and there need to be rules that are enforced to make sure that the ballots are protected.
Do you think that the simplest solution would just be to require in-person voting?
Well, I mean, that would certainly be simple, but it would be a tremendous hardship for some people who do genuinely have a hard time getting to the polls. There are people. It was the saddest thing. I'm watching this video one weekend, having ruined like basically 3 weeks of my life looking at these crazy videos. But there was a handicapped couple that was literally dragging themselves. They were dragging themselves across the front patio of the City Hall annex. It was probably, I don't know, 30, 40 yards, something like that. And they were very restricted in their mobility. And they're two of them, and they're both mobility restricted. One's got one ballot, one's got the other ballot. And they thought it was important enough that they could drag themselves across this patio to put their ballots into the drop box. And so for them, yeah, I mean, not having to find parking, being able to do this on a Sunday morning or a Saturday morning, for them, I think that absentee voting is helps make it easier to vote. Making it easier to vote is not the problem. Making it harder to vote by breaking the rules is the problem. And again, I go back to enforcement. I think that this is going to ultimately be a law enforcement issue.
Yeah, that's that's what it would require, especially having some back end repercussions for if you engage in this activity, the book's coming down. We can't have this, especially when you're in a situation like we find ourselves with the current national climate around elections and people being severely skeptical and calling into question the presidential election. I would imagine that might almost hinder this moving forward because people wouldn't want to look at it for what it is. And for the
Well,
extreme,
it certainly feeds into that whole debate, and it means that uh, the Democrats cannot deny that there has been some evidence of absentee ballot fraud in Bridgeport. They can't, and the Republicans can certainly say, "See, it's happening in Bridgeport. We don't know where else it's happening." Well, okay, I mean, I get that, and the answer to that, I think, at least for Connecticut, is that the data, the numbers just suggest that it is not an issue anywhere but in Bridgeport. Now, do I know New York? No. Do I know Boston? No. Do I know Atlanta? No. I know that there have been plenty of people that looked at those cases and or places, and either they didn't find evidence of fraud, or there wasn't evidence of fraud. I don't know. Um, I know the difference between my case and the post 2020 election cases is we had evidence. Lawyers are not magicians. I can't create evidence out of thin air. But we had what we had. We had the videos. We had the witness statements. We had the numbers, the data, and so we were able to prove misconduct. But I do agree that it at a minimum feeds into the narrative and reinforces cynicism by anybody who wants to look at what the facts are here. It does. I can't dispute that, and that's why I think one of the things that the people that were involved in this really have, um, not only locally but nationally, have not done us any favors. People who believe in fair elections have not done us any favors by creating a piece of a data point showing that there was absentee ballot misconduct. I think that's deeply unfortunate that we are in this situation.
Yeah, now Bridgeport is almost a lightning rod example where you can point at it and say, oh, well, look at this, look at these egregious amounts of fraud. Is it just localized in Bridgeport or is it more national? I mean, what kind of numbers are we dealing with?
Well, and there's it's hard to answer that, isn't it? I go back to what we had. We had evidence. I don't know what the lawyers and some of the unsuccessful uh, uh, election challenges did or had or looked at. I don't know if the claims were absentee ballot fraud or something else. I just can't comment on whether this is the tip of the iceberg nationally or whether this is a one off in one very insular and very difficult to run elections city in one of the smallest states in the country. I don't know. I can't. Again, that's why I'm a little bit uncomfortable saying with both sides using this case as a kind of of a shining example of how the system works, or a tawdry example of how elections are all crooked. I don't think it's either one to me, but I don't know what's happening in these other cities. I stick with Connecticut. I'm not setting foot outside of Connecticut on an election case.
Has have cases like this one, and especially over your career, you said 40 years you've been doing election cases, has that changed your view on election security or integrity?
Well, I think what has happened in Bridgeport has changed my view on election security. I think that um, I don't think that there is a way to legislate your way out of it other than by banning absentee balloting, which I am not in favor of. I don't think that that's fair to people that legitimately need absentee ballots to most expeditiously and most painlessly cast their vote. I don't. The problem isn't absentee ballots. The problem is people don't who break the rules in collecting absentee ballots and assisting people in voting by absentee ballot, or who else knows what happens here. Um, I'm actually pretty encouraged by election security elsewhere in the state of Connecticut. I think that I, I I can't tell you the last time I got a call from somebody who had a complaint about something similar to what's happening in Bridgeport. The complaints are always just kind of, well, the assistant. I was involved in a case where the assistant town clerk went to the drop box and picked up the ballots, and the statute says the clerk has to do it. I'm like, okay, fine. I mean, so what? Are the ballots valid or are they not valid? Are they forged or not forged? Did you receive them in time or did you not receive them in time? I'm all for counting valid votes under our statute. I'm not a big hyper technical. You forgot to cross a T on some form, and so this vote should be thrown out. I don't buy that at all. But I do think that there is from an enforcement perspective, we have to pay more attention to what's happening. Now, could it be that there's similar problems in other towns and cities in Connecticut? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's possible, I guess, but all I know is I don't get calls from anywhere except Bridgeport.
Yeah, that's what also adds to the nuance of this conversation is you have legitimate cases of ballot stuffing, and then you also have ballots where maybe they were improperly marked or improperly dated or the signature wasn't quite right and it might have just been an honest mistake. It's like, well,
Well,
this
and
is all
there are a lot of ways in Connecticut. There are a lot of ways to make an honest mistake that will disqualify your ballot. It's a very cumbersome process. We have Uh, there's a voter gets a ballot, which the voter has to fill out, and that's secret. There's no names on the ballot other than candidates. But then the voter has to put the ballot in what's called an inner envelope, which has the voter's signature on it, and is serial numbered, and then puts the inner envelope with the ballot into an outer envelope, which is used to mail it back to the town clerk, where it's assembled and ultimately counted by the town clerk or the registrar. So if somebody doesn't sign the inner envelope but casts the ballot that would otherwise be valid, it doesn't get counted. If the ballot is in the outer envelope but not in the inner envelope, but they're both inside the both of them, the inner envelope and the ballot are both in the outer envelope, it doesn't get counted. So there's lots of technical ways that if there's no inner envelope, it doesn't get counted. So there's lots of ways to mess up absentee balloting in Connecticut. Somewhere between, depending on the state or on the city, I've seen between 5 and 7% of absentee ballots don't get counted because the voter makes a mistake, and it's easy to make a mistake. So our Secretary of State here, Stephanie Thomas, who is new, just called on voters in Bridgeport to, if you can get to the polls, forget the absentee ballots, do it in person. It's you don't have to put up with any kind of pressure from any partisans. You want to make sure your vote counts. If there's a problem, say when you get to the voting station, uh, if you mess up your ballot, and the machine will actually tell you and let you tear up that ballot and get a clean one. That doesn't happen with absentee balloting. If you send something in and it's messed up, that's the end of it. It is undeniable that voting in person is more secure, it's more forgiving, but it is less convenient, and it's way less convenient for some people. One of the problems in cities in particular is how long do you want to wait in the line to vote in person? And that's a question of election administration. I think more people would vote in person if they could be guaranteed that they'd be in and out in 5 minutes. Now, I've never waited in an election line in my life. But in some of the cities here, because of a shortage of workers or for whatever reason, it can take a long time. And we've seen pictures in some cities. I think, what was it, Atlanta? There were 3-hour waits. Well, of course that's going to drive people to vote absentee. I mean, who's going to stand in line for 3 hours if you have an opportunity to vote absentee? So making the election polling places more efficient, getting people in and out more quickly, I think that would definitely help too.
Yeah, we've made it easier to vote in some ways and yet just restricted it in others. You would think that, okay, we acknowledge that the best way, the most secure way is to vote in person. Like you said, let's just figure out a way where we can get people in and out like they're going through a drive-through to pick up food.
Well, we're starting to do an early voting in Connecticut now. In Connecticut, it's funny, it's a blue state. People think it's pretty progressive, and in many respects it is. But it's got some of the most restrictive voting laws in the United States. We do not have any early voting. You either vote absentee or you vote in person on the first Tuesday in November. And the places where allow you to go into the town clerk's office and drop off your ballot on the Friday before the election. Or we don't have that here. It's starting in the next cycle. But we're way behind making it easy for people to vote. But that to me, voting in person at the town clerk's office and early voting is just as secure as voting in a polling place on election day. And I'm not worried about a campaign official walking into the clerk's office with somebody to cast an early vote. I am worried about an absentee ballot popping up in somebody's mailbox, and some partisan walks by and says, "I see you got your absentee ballot here. Just fill it out, and I'll take it back for you." That's I think a much greater risk than any risk from early voting.
Yeah, I'm over in California, and the push for absentee ballots is huge. I voted both in person. I have voted by mail. It's just the climate is vote as early as you can and vote by mail.
Well, the campaigns love that because they know who they don't have to work on anymore, right? If I vote by absentee and my ballot is in 2 weeks before the election, then I'm dropped off the phone lists. Nobody's calling me anymore. Nobody's saying, do you need a ride to the polls? Nobody's saying, do you need an absentee ballot? So no, campaigns love it when people vote early by absentee because they know
They
and
can
they
check that
know who's in
box.
the bank. Yeah, who they know who's in the box already, who's in the bank, whose vote is already counted. Um, so that is a temptation. Actually, I think that's part of what has fueled the absentee ballot uh, kind of operations in Bridgeport. That you can kind of keep track of which of your people, which are the people that you think are your people. The ones and the twos, as they call them, have actually already gone ahead and voted, and so you can focus your attention on the people who are your ones and twos who are still out there, who haven't uh, either returned an absentee ballot or have said that they're just going to go to the polls. So yeah, and that's I think that helps to drive it too. That's a good comment.
Yeah, I didn't think about the campaign aspect where you would want to incentivize that. And that way you have a greater understanding and an understanding that is farther out from election day. You're not waiting till the 11th hour, watching the counts come in, thinking, okay, do I have this or do I not? You kind of have an idea of, oh, I've already got X amount of ballots coming in. My chances might be pretty good.
Sure, and in Connecticut, you absentee ballots can be dropped 30 days before a general, 21 days before a primary. So, and then the campaigns get a list of who is voted by absentee ballot periodically, so they can go through and they can say, well, look, we distributed 1,000 absentee ballot applications. We've got 300 from people that we distributed have been returned. So we're just going to focus all of our energy on the other 700. Yeah, sure. That's smart politics. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is taking custody of other people's ballots. They're calling them, get your ballot in. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But pressuring people, taking custody of their ballots, that's not fine.
Is this the first time that a new primary has been called in Bridgeport?
Oh no, no. There was a new primary last year in a state rep race. There was three. There were two new primaries in a city council race, and I think it was 2019 or 2020. I forget the year. No, it might have been a little earlier than that. Uh, but it is not it is not. I think the number of new primaries ordered in Bridgeport for absentee ballot misconduct exceeds the number in the entire state of Connecticut over the same period of time.
See, when you hear stats like that, I don't understand how people aren't saying this is a problem, especially where it's so localized. You would think, okay, easier to address. Let's figure out what is happening in Bridgeport.
Well, but there's got to be an incentive to address it,
And
and as long as it doesn't have an impact on the election, because in 2019, I suspect that the same thing was happening, but there weren't cameras at the time, and nobody leaked it if there was a camera. So there's no adverse consequence to the race from the kind of misconduct that there was evidence of in 2019. So far in Bridgeport, this cycle, the only consequence has been to redo a primary. Now, there may be other consequences. I suspect that there may well be, but as of today, that's the only consequence.
how, okay, so you go to this next election, this new primary.
Right.
What is to stop somebody from calling this one into question?
Nothing. No, it could happen, and I'm a little concerned just again by the number of absentee ballot applications that have been taken out. That the lessons of the November 1st court order have maybe fleeting. They may now. Although on the other hand, Judge Clark, the judge who decided the case, did a couple of things that I think helped. He shortened the time frame where absentee ballot applications could be filled out to really only about just during the 3 weeks before the primary. It was we had absentee ballot applications for the primary, the September primary, that voters completed in April, saying that they were going to be sick in September, and that was the basis for their voting by absentee ballot. Well, that's nonsense, and that's no. I mean, is it possible that there's somebody that's got some kind of a permanent illness that prevents them from going to the polls? Okay, I'm sure there are individuals that can be in that position, but not the numbers that we saw, and not over the time that we had. So Judge Clark shortened the time frame for where absentee ballot applications could even be sought, which I think is smart. That is actually something I would recommend to the legislature because it shortens the amount of time for shenanigans. Frankly, it compresses the time frame, and the defendants in our case opposed that part of the order, but the Secretary of the State agreed with it, and the judge thought it was a good idea based on what had happened here.
Is that all that he implemented, was just a shorter time frame for that?
Well, the Secretary of State also ordered there to be an election monitor appointed by the Secretary of State. She actually appointed two, as it turned out, one longtime employee of the Secretary of State's office and one retired Republican registrar from a neighboring town. I'm not 100% clear on what exactly they're doing, whether they are out at they're not watching the drop boxes or anything like that, but I'm sure they're keeping an eye on the paperwork. And I think it's a little bit of a kind of an incentive for people to follow the rules when they know there are at least a couple of state officials keep watching what they can watch. But those people, I don't think, are out in the public housing where a lot of the ballot harvesting is taking place or took place anyway in the last cycle. So, I think it was a positive thing to do, but it's pretty far short of being able to stop the kind of problems that we saw in the last primary.
Do you anticipate it being called into question?
I don't know. I can say this. I would not count anything out. I do not have a 100% degree of confidence that there aren't going to be problems again. No, there are too many people. Again, there are too many people that are voting by absentee ballot compared to the number of people voting. However, the numbers seem to be about half of what they were in the primary in September, at least the people that have returned ballots so far. And you don't usually get a lot of absentee ballots this late in the cycle because people think, well, if I mail it on Monday, it's not going to get to the clerk by Tuesday. If I mail it on Saturday, it might not. So the numbers are going to be about half of absentee ballots compared to the primary. And frankly, I think that's good if the in-person voting at the primary goes up by that amount. Then I think that's maybe some evidence that it's working. If the absentee ballots have gone down by 700, but the in-person has also gone down by 700, then I'm not so.
Yeah, it kind of counteracts. And it calls into question, like you said, so you have this precedent that people are participating in these acts. Yeah, you caught them through the video cameras at these ballot boxes, but what if they do just go to the mail? So I'm just going to drop these in post office box, no cameras.
There is no way that I'm going to know about that absent some kind of an internal to a campaign whistleblower or some kind of one-off something. I mean, I've got a couple of ideas. I'll tell you, the state actually seized all of the outer envelopes from the September primary, and they said they're going to test them for fingerprints. And so, I would be pretty surprised if any ballot harvesters. I'm not sure whether fingerprints can be pulled off of an envelope like that. Paper is not real easy to fingerprint, and a piece of mail is not exactly handled gingerly, in its course. So it may be that any fingerprints are destroyed, but at least the state claims they're going to try to fingerprint and maybe DNA test outer envelope. I don't know whether that's really true or not, but they said that in a filing. So in court. So, but short of that, as I said before, I'm just afraid that we've drawn a roadmap on how to get around the rules, and that's certainly I will. I'm not going to look at 2,100 hours of video because I think it's exceedingly unlikely that any ballot harvesters, if there are any, are you going to use the drop boxes this cycle? You'd be crazy to.
Yeah, now they're aware of it.
Sure.
Okay, the cameras are watching me. Let's go this alternate route.
Well, that's the funny thing. The cameras weren't a secret before the primary. The
But you
cameras
have
are
to have
right
somebody
there.
that watches the cameras.
Well, that's right. That's the difference. The cameras are there, but unless you know that somebody's watching them, so what? It doesn't make any difference. And it didn't change anybody's behavior in September, knowing the cameras were there, because they did what they did in full view of quite clear video cameras. Very, um, and nobody was trying to hide anything, which is truthfully, that to me, that was the scariest aspect of this. This was done very much out in the open, very much in public, very much inside of a camera, and it didn't matter. Well, how do you change behavior that does that? Other than enforcement, law enforcement, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I wish I did.
Yeah, if the cameras were meant as a deterrent, clearly didn't stop anybody.
No, didn't change any behavior at all.
I mean, it like Judge Clark said, it's shocking when you hear it, especially when you hear it laid out like this, that it's just a brazen act.
And it's one, I was on a town committee in my town for a little while. If somebody had stood up in a town committee meeting and said, this is what we're going to do to try to win the next election, they would have been run out. They would have been, nobody would have gone along with it. But it's part of the culture here. It's a political culture anyway, that this is part of the acceptable route to winning elections. And I think it's sad. I think it is. I think it's the participation rate in the voting participation rate in Bridgeport has dropped precipitously through the years. And I don't know Bridgeport well enough. I mean, I work here. I've got friends here, but I'm not a voter in Bridgeport. But I wonder if part of the reason that the voting rate has gone down so much over the years is just this kind of cynicism that it doesn't matter. And if that is the case, and I can see that being a rational conclusion on the part of some voters. And if that is the case, I think that is a profoundly sad effect of this kind of activity. We don't need to be doing things to make people more cynical about voting. There's lots of other reasons that people are cynical about voting, but ballot stuffing on video is just it not only does it not help, I think it hurts. It hurts faith in the system. It hurts belief in the integrity of elections, and whether it is the tip of an iceberg or whether it is a one-off, kind of doesn't matter, because it feeds into that narrative, that conclusion that if you want to see evidence of absentee ballot misconduct, all you have to do is click on Exhibit 143 in my case, and you got 17 minutes of videos of people dropping other people's ballots into drop boxes, then taking the fifth about it.
Yeah, it's hard not to draw the conclusion that your vote doesn't matter when you see that.
Well, it certainly doesn't help. I will be interested to see what the rate is of participation in the new primary. I mean, now it's the middle of winter here; it's cold. It's confusing. This is not something that people are used to. The campaigns have both been working very hard, but we're just gonna have to see. I don't know.
What is the sense on the ground? I mean, has the public seen any of those videos? Have they been released?
Oh yeah. They've been pretty available here. The Gomes campaign kind of put them up on their website. I think the Connecticut Mirror, which is an online journalism project, put the entire video up. No, it's received quite a bit of play, and has been viewed by a lot of people. I think most of the news outlets used it. I know the Fox channel here used it. The ABC affiliate used it. CBS affiliate used it. I think anybody who wanted to look at it had an opportunity to look at it.
Safe to say that most people are aware of just how crazy it went this last election.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, not everybody pays huge attention to politics. Obviously, the participation rate in the primary was only about 15%, which is, really awful when you get right down to it. 15% of registered Democrats. But I think anybody who is paying attention knows about it, and anybody who's just a little bit paying attention probably knows enough about it. The only people that never heard of it are people that are just kind of disengaged from the political process, and they're not going to vote in a primary anyway. So, that's I think how many did it change anybody's mind? I mean, I think that's really an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I would like to think that there are some number of people that would look at that video and say, you know what, we got a problem here, and we got to try to fix it. And the optimistic part of me says that that's the case. And then, the pessimistic part of me says, your tribe is your tribe, and you're just going to stick with your tribe winner, no matter what, as long as they keep winning. But I don't know. I'm well, I guess we're going to have to see.
Yeah, I'm alarmed to say it, but I think a lot of people do fall into that latter camp, where it's just, this is my party. Blue, no matter who; red, no matter who. You see the D or the R, and you check that box.
Well, there is correct. I am actually a registered independent party member. Set up a minor party, helped set up a minor party in my town a couple of years ago, and kind of went in that direction. Like to try to, work with sensible people on both sides. But I mean, but they're I'd like to go to a candidate forum, and there wasn't one for this race. I'd like to go to a candidate forum where like uncommitted people that weren't in either Ganem's camp or Gomes camp, were able to go and ask questions and really have the candidates listen to them, because I just have a feeling that there is getting to be some number of people that in Bridgeport are tired of it, that are just tired of the nonsense, that are tired of, being in the New York Times, not because of some great public works project, but because of, years of ballot misconduct. Then they're tired of the Elections Enforcement Commission. Um, there's something like 20 something complaints relating to the primary that are now pending before the state. And I just think at some point there a core of people in Bridgeport is going to say, we've had enough. We don't want to be known for this. We want to be known for something else. We want to be known for, being the home of P.T. Barnum. We want to be known for, having a vibrant music amphitheater. We want to be known for something other than absentee ballot misconduct. And so, we're gonna hopefully see that.
Yeah, you don't want to be the city known for voter fraud.
No,
there are a
my
lot
light
of
just turned itself off. Here we go.
Those motion lights. Yeah, there are a lot of things that you want higher up on that list than to be known nationally for that.
Yeah, it's not great. It's again, it's sad. That's the word I keep coming back to, and that's absolutely what I believe.
Yeah, especially with a turnout of 15%. Do you know the average for Connecticut as a whole?
I don't really. I don't. I think
15's pretty low.
Right. I think Hartford just had a 3-way primary in September, and I think their rate was around 25, I want to say. But I really haven't researched that carefully. It has dropped in Bridgeport significantly. It's about half of what it used to be. So, is that reflective of national trends? I don't really know, but I just know that it's not going in a positive direction.
And you would think at face value that this would be a nonpartisan issue, that both sides would recognize election integrity is in everybody's benefit. We want people to believe that our elections are strong and secure, and we can come together to achieve that.
Well, you would think that, and it may become bipartisan depending on what the General Assembly does. I'm going to make some proposals to our General Assembly next month. Shortening the time to get applications is definitely going to be on the list. Cameras is going to be on the list, although I'm pretty ambivalent about that, honestly. So, there are a few things tinkering around the edges I think can be done, but it's again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Is it more important to win an election, or is it more important to have principles? And when I was a kid, one of my political leaders that I really respected was Mario Cuomo, who used to be the governor of New York. And the reason I thought he was somebody I admired is he said, every politician needs to have an issue that they would rather lose an election over than compromise their principle. And for him, it was a death penalty. He kept vetoing the death penalty in New York. And I don't know, this was maybe in the 70s, something like that. And he ultimately got beat for it. And he said, I don't care. That was something that I was not going to compromise my principles on. I would like to think that there are politicians in Connecticut that would rather not compromise their principles on election integrity than to win an election. I guess we're going to have to see. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about Connecticut, but at a national level, it does not feel like politicians these days have that level of integrity. It might not be cheat to win, but it's definitely sell your soul, change whatever you have to get where you want to go.
Well, that's the question I keep asking myself. I always ask the Mario Cuomo question. What is it that this person, this man, this woman, what is this person feels so strongly about that if they knew that it was going to lose in the election, what would they change their mind? Would they do it differently? I don't, and with some people, it's pretty hard to identify that belief, that core principle. But I think some people, I mean, maybe even many people, do have that, but it's sometimes harder to see in other people.
Definitely sometimes harder to see. Bill, thank you for doing this. Thanks for taking the time to come on and chat with me.
My pleasure, Nick. Anytime, and we'll keep listening.
Yeah, the election's tomorrow. We'll see how it goes.
Indeed. All right. Take care.